Behind the headlines, immigration and the environment. More than 30 million people living in the U.S. were born elsewhere, a rapid rise in the percentage of foreign-born from just a decade earlier. In the third part of a three-part series, we look at immigration's impact on the U.S. environment. The California coastline is one of the nation's most beautiful environmental treasures. But some are concerned the natural beauty of the state is being destroyed.
Parts of coastal California, not the entire coast, but this part of coastal California, Central California, is one of the world's 25 hotspots, what they call ecological hotspots. And they are the most endangered ecosystems in the world.
Immigration is a hot topic in Washington politics. Last year, negotiations between Congress and the White House fell apart on immigration policy. But rarely do politicians approach immigration as an issue affecting the environment. It has major implications. Most immigrants coming to the U.S. arrive from less developed nations, which consume less energy and create fewer material goods. Increased consumption harms the environment by destroying habitat and creating more pollution. Steve Camarota's group advocates for lower immigration levels.
If you think about the world perspective, you're transferring people from the less polluting parts of the world, that is the less developed world, to the more polluting part of the world.
Immigration to the United States increases demand for products and services worldwide because Americans create such high demand for consumer goods.
They want to consume like Americans. Now, how could you say morally or ethically, well, they don't have a right to consume just as much as Americans do? But the problem is that if you're going to create a gigantic population growth in this country, you're going to create a gigantic increase in consumption. And things that are in this country, like the Chesapeake Bay, the Everglades, the Great Lakes, various of the old growth forests that are under threat, all of those entities are going to be far more difficult to protect because of this massive population growth.
California has seen its population increase more than most states from immigration.
500,000 more people every year is going to have very serious effects on California, both its environment and its infrastructure and just general land use issues.
Federal surveys show during the last decade, 2 million acres per year of farmland are being developed into roads or buildings. That's 20 million acres of farmland and natural habitat that has disappeared in a decade. These same federal data show half of that is due to population growth.
It's pretty closely accurate to say that our immigration policies are resulting in 1 million acres of natural habitat, wetlands, forests, prairies, as well as prime farmland being scraped and paved and built on.
We are one of the 5 nations in the world that exports food, net exporters of food. And it would be a terrible tragedy to pave over the best farmland, some of the really best farmland in the whole world.
More than 3 million children in the United States live in households with parents who immigrated within the past 10 years. Some call immigration a factor in increased traffic, air pollution, and suburban sprawl.
When people come here, it's not just loss of farmland, it's all the shopping centers and houses and schools and hospitals that have to be built. It's affected every aspect of life here.
A May 2006 Zogby poll commissioned by the Center for Immigration Studies shows likely voters want less, not more immigration. Only 26% said immigrants were assimilating well and that immigration should continue at current levels, compared with 67% who said immigration should be reduced, so immigrants already in the U.S. can assimilate more thoroughly.
We could grow from our current 300 million to 1 billion, 2 billion. I think that's true. There is room in a kind of physical sense. In the same way, maybe you could think of your house at home or your apartment. Could you fit another person? To say there's 2 or 3 people living there, could you fit another 3 people? Well, of course. But the question is, what does it mean for all these things that we care about? Whether it's an issue like sprawl, how much land gets developed, global warming, clean water, and so forth.
Roy Beck of Numbers USA graphically demonstrates the growth in immigration.
This tube represents the average number of immigrants who came every year in our first 200 years, 1776 to 1976, about 235,000 immigrants per year. After World War II, we went up a little bit. So from World War II to the first Earth Day, 1945 to 1970, a few more, about 255,000. What's changed and why Americans are so concerned about immigration is that since 1990, 1 million every year. That's 1 million a year versus our immigration tradition.
Dan Stein runs the Federation for American Immigration Reform, which also lobbies for lowered immigration rates.
So if we grow to 500 million or 1 billion people in this century, which we could, the big question we ought to be asking is, why wasn't that population growth planned for? And why weren't the environmental impacts of adding another 300-400 million people brought into consideration when we made that decision?
Most of the large environmental groups have shied away from immigration. I asked Diana Hull why.
Well, they've all opted out on this, and many of them have actually been hijacked by business or very powerful corporate interests.
Advocates for less immigration stress they're not against immigrants, although many people see them that way.
Not because immigrants are bad people environmentally. It's just they are people. And if you're going to import massive population growth into this country, you are going to import a lot of environmental destruction.